So Joe Biden, in all his horribleness, continues to become more and more horrible. He doesn't seem to be giving a shit anymore, and he's just making a fool of himself at this point. Not that he wasn't already, obviously, but he's just making more of a fool of himself. And he continues to shit on millennials for no reason, basically. And so I'm going to read you guys a Huffington Post article here. It's a pretty quick piece. It's just documenting some comments he made here towards millennials. So the title of the article says, Joe Biden to millennials. Don't tell me how bad it is. Change it. Yeah, very condescending tone right there, Joe. We appreciate it. And then in the subheadline, it says, young people are facing a dark financial future, but the Democratic presidential candidate doesn't want to hear it if they aren't going to get politically involved. And then let's get into the body here. It says, former Vice President Joe Biden has a message for the millennial generation. Stop complaining if you aren't going to engage with politics. The 2020 Democratic presidential contender stood by the skepticism he expressed last year when asked about young adults' belief that they face outsized hurdles to secure housing and pay off debt. I have no empathy for it. Give me a break, Biden said in 2018. Asked to explain what he meant, Biden began talking about his personal experience growing up with very modest means and how he felt upon learning about a study that found relatively few young people today would consider running for political office. We have an obligation to get engaged, Biden said at Saturday's AFSCME forum, co-moderated by HuffPost. You all have an obligation to get engaged. Don't tell me how bad it is. Change it, change it, change it. I love how he's trying to sound like he's pretending like he's sounding inspiring, like he's motivating people. And then he added, my generation did it. Yeah, your generation of like fucking old dudes and women that are dying off. How can you expect people to be inspired to want to do this, to run for office when the fucking political system is so fucked up? Okay, we're going to get into that in a second. But anyway, it says Biden drew some criticism the first time he went after millennials, more than a year before he announced his candidacy. Conservative New York Times opinion writer and climate denier Bret Stephens later sided with Biden in a column criticizing the millennial generation, which Stephens said specializes in histrionic self-pity and moral self-righteousness. As HuffPost's Michael Hobbs reported in 2017, there is a large amount of research and data that paints a bleak financial future for young people, many of whom are already reporting that they are finding themselves priced out of the housing market. Although Biden has consistently polled highest among the wide field of 2020 Democratic presidential contenders, his supporters skew older and more moderate. At the forum, he went on to say, I just don't want people telling me on a college campus, oh, woe is me. I've got it so bad. Come on. So, as usual, Joe Biden trying to, be condescending and talking down to people that are suffering through student loan debt and not having a decent, paying job and having to suffer through, issues of whether it's income inequality, whether, some of them may have health problems, some of them, as I said, are dealing with student loan debt. They, they're living, some of them are homeless even sometimes, some of them are forced to join the military even a lot of times. And then he's like, oh, well, why don't you just run for office? Well, how are people going to run for office when the political system is so absolutely corrupted and fucked up by big corporations and lobbyists and donors and all that stuff? You actually expect to inspire, this is an inspiring message telling them to change it. That's not going to inspire anybody to want to run for office. That's totally the total opposite is going to happen. This is not going to get people to get on board with you, Joe. So if you think, talking down to people like that and saying, well, my generation did it. Okay, yeah, but your generation is a bunch of old farts and people that were honestly not living. First of all, they were not living in a corrupted system as much as it is corrupted right now. I mean, if you consider the impact of the campaign finance system, So how, the policies that were implemented that fucked up the camp and fine system, if you go from Buckley v. Vallejo and, Citizens United and everything in between, and even after, these policies have, I think McCutcheon is another one, the McCutcheon ruling. These policies have all these kind of this, whether it's legislation or Supreme Court, Supreme Court decisions or whatever. All these things have had an impact on the political climate and the political, kind of the political world in general, not just America, and all over the world. It's fucked up because of us too. I mean, just the fact that we're getting politicians into office right now that are bought out by the military-industrial complex, who fulfill those donors that give them money in the military-industrial complex, and then they push for wars, and they push for endless wars to bomb brown people in 8 different countries, and then people like Joe Biden, who voted for the Iraq War, who pretty much supported every single disastrous war that we're currently in, even when he was vice president under Obama, let alone the Iraq War when he was in the Senate. He's trying to lecture people and tell them, pretending as if it's so easy to just run for president. I'm sorry, not run for president necessarily, but whatever, run for public office, whether it's president, Senate, Congress, State House, whatever. And as if you just run for these political, these political, positions, these public office positions, and automatically, everything is going to be wonderful and it's going to be easy and you're going to be able to get change so easily. I mean, look at somebody like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. This is somebody that spoke out so heavily in favor, so heavily against the likes of Nancy Pelosi and the Democratic establishment, and she's gotten just completely brutalized by them because she dares to speak out against them. And even the people that claim to love her so much, they're like, "Oh, I love Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, but she needs to learn to work within the system a little bit more. She needs to get, basically trained by other politicians to be more like them, so that she's basically is what they're saying is they don't want her to disrupt the system." Something obviously, as we mentioned, we were talking about earlier, that Bernie Sanders is in favor of disrupting the system, just as I feel that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is, especially since she's a Bernie Sanders supporter and was supported, pushed heavily by Bernie Sanders and groups affiliated with him, but she wants to disrupt the system, and God forbid she disrupts anything that ruins the day of poor Queen Nancy Pelosi over there, Speaker of the House. God forbid you make her angry and protest in her office to push for climate change, and then stuff like that, because Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez went in with the Sunrise Movement, which is a great organization. She went with them and she protested in Nancy Pelosi's office like a day or two after she won her seat in Congress in New York, which she was outnumbered she was outspent 10-1 by Joe Crowley, who was in that seat for almost 2 decades, and he was the successor to Nancy Pelosi, ironically, and she ended up beating him. And she was protesting in Nancy Pelosi's office, and she got a ton of hate for it. And God forbid you don't do what the Queen Pelosi says, and you dishonor her her throne. God forbid can't do that. It's like apparently that's like stabbing some Democratic loyalist voters. I'm talking about actual voters. That's stabbing them in the back. They don't like that. It's just crazy. People like this, they just don't value the idea of dissent, especially when it's within their own party. So it's because notice that when the Republican Party, they had that kind of whole uprising with the Tea Party. So Republicans were scared shitless of the Tea Party when they took over, especially. I mean, I think the only reason why they were forced to give in to what the Tea Party demanded was because the Tea Party was being bankrolled by the Koch brothers, and the Koch brothers run the Republican Party too. So they were bankrolling everything. Basically, they were running the whole operation and then allowing basically a coup to happen within the Republican Party, getting rid of a lot of moderates and a lot of kind of centrist Republicans, and so-called Republicans. Honestly, they're not really that centrist and they're not really that moderate, but that's what Washington considers them to be. They're just basically conservatives that aren't super, I guess, religious and super anti-abortion and stuff like that. They're just not like seen as super like radical. But the people that were in the Tea Party that were trying to take over, they were all radical. They were all, anti-abortion, super religious, super anti-government, talking about Obamacare being a government takeover, all that stuff that was going on. This was back in 2009, and they ended up taking over the Congress in 2010, which was only, this was after Obamacare was passed too. And Nancy Pelosi was only running Congress under a Democratic, under both houses, so both the Senate and the House. This was only 2 years where Nancy Pelosi was Speaker of the House when the Democrats had control of both House and Senate. And she managed to get Obamacare through because of that. She had that, but ultimately she ended up losing the whole thing because she continued to push for shitty centrist policies like Obamacare. And this was at a time, as we discussed earlier, the ideas... Cenk Uygur, I played a clip of Cenk Uygur talking about how the idea of Obamacare was pushed, the whole idea of individual mandate and a right-wing plan. That was the plan that Democrats wanted. They didn't want the public option. Obviously, they want the public option now. But back in 2009, when the Tea Party was running, the public option was, that was no way. There was no way the Democrats were going to consider that. I'm sorry, before the Tea Party rose to fame, the Democrats were no way they were going to push for the public option. They saw that as too radical. Now they see Medicare for all as too radical. So, but when it comes to this whole idea of, kind of getting involved in government, it's way too corrupt, and it's way too run by big corporations, as far as being donors and stuff, and lobbyists representing those corporations, and corrupting all these politicians that they're in there, and then they claim to be kind of standing up on behalf of the people, and in reality they're just standing up on behalf of those donors and those corporations that have lobbyists that are bribing them. So they just do whatever their corporate masters tell them, and that's what it's all about. They don't care about the people. They claim to. They just say they care about the people as a talking point, but they don't actually care about people. They don't actually care about what regular people are suffering through. It's all about pleasing their corporate donors, and that's what Democrats have become. And Joe Biden has been like that pretty much his entire career, if not his entire career for sure. And he's always been a moderate, always been a fucking, basically might as well be like Republican, in drag, basically. I'm sorry, Democrat in drag, In reality, he's just a, Republican who has a D in front of his name. And he's talking about how people have to get involved or just shut up, basically. If you don't want to get involved, shut the hell up. Fuck off. That's basically what he's telling young people. And, he lectured he lectured millennials before, as they mentioned in this article. He was doing some sort of sit-down interview, town hall kind of thing.
Public service seems now not to be held in very high esteem.
No, it's not. And no, but it's not just because, I'll be very blunt, it's not just because of our president. It's a whole lot of things. I only had two political heroes in my whole life. And this is not new. I've said this since 1972. Dr. King and Robert Kennedy. And up to that point, there was a war raging. There was a bitter fight over even whether we should talk about the environment. Women were still viewed as second-class citizens and not prepared to have significant jobs, thought that. And we were told the people didn't talk to one another over the war. And we were told, drop out, go out to Haight-Ashbury, get engaged. Now, shortly after I graduated in '68, Kent State, 17 kids shot dead. And so the younger generation now tells me how tough things are. Give me a break. No. I have no empathy for it. Give me a break.
He just has so much contempt for millennials. Joe Biden is like that, compared to Bernie Sanders, who doesn't do these kind of things, and he's older than Biden is. But Joe Biden is the old grandpa guy who goes out there and just, lectures people about, what they should and shouldn't believe in, what they should and shouldn't do, and acts like he's educated them, and in reality he's just a condescending prick. That's all Joe Biden is, and that's all he's going to be. And this is another example of that.